CFX, The Connection of Things, streams live from Secwepemcúl'ecw, the traditional and unceded territory of the Secwepemc Nation in southern British Columbia, Canada. I'm Barry Wilson. And I often say, if you want to make change, start by looking in the mirror. When I talk about prosperity and unlocking it, I am so aware that one of the biggest elephants in the room that's blocking the door is the accumulating impact of colonization, especially here in Canada. When I was 6 months old, our family moved to Germany. We were a military family and we were posted there for 5 years during the Cold War. This is back in the 60s. And recently I was having a conversation with my mom about, things that we've done. And she told me about when we returned to Canada. I was 5 years old and we were driving down, we just returned to Canada from Germany. We were driving down a street in Trenton, Ontario. And I yelled out, I saw an Indian on the sidewalk and I yelled out, "There's an Indian," and I hit the deck in the vehicle and said, "Got to get down so we don't get hurt." And I was saying that because I'd seen that on cowboys and Indians movies and shows on TV. And Mom was like, "It's fine. There's nothing to be afraid of. He's a perfectly fine person. Don't worry, Barry." But clearly, I'd already been influenced by the colonial perspective of mainstream media. It doesn't feel good, actually. From grade 5 to 12, I was in Cold Lake, Alberta. And many of my friends and hockey teammates were native, was the word we used at the time. And I knew they lived on reserves. And I knew there were differences. But I didn't understand colonization. And I can tell you they were not teaching us that in school. And I was really awoke to the reality about 10 years ago. I took a course at the University of Toronto called Aboriginal Worldviews in Education. And boy, did that open my eyes. Big time. And then I needed to know more. I took more university courses, college courses. I learned from Indigenous scholars, and I continue to work with Indigenous clients, elders, truth tellers, and I dug into the colonial laws myself to learn about this history of Canada that I was largely unaware of. And we're at this time of reconciliation, and I really believe that reconciliation has to begin with awareness and with dialogue, especially among non-Indigenous people. My guest today on CFX, The Connection of Things, is Master of Design, Strategic Foresight, and Innovation, Kathy Porter. Hi, Kathy.
Hey, Barry. How are you? Good to see you.
I'm good. It's great to see you too. Kathy and I are going to start a conversation today. It's a journey that we think we all must walk together if we're going to unlock prosperity while caring for the earth. So, Kathy, if you're good with it, I'm going to hit that music and we're going to get into this because we've got lots to chat about.
Okay, I'm ready.
Now, as always, I'm unapologetic. I have notes because I have lots of things I want to make sure that I say and I don't forget stuff. So I can't remember it all. Yeah, Kathy, there you go. Great minds think alike. So, it was 2005 when I had an amazing opportunity to put in a proposal for the consultancy that I was working with to do a project looking at cumulative effects and developing a management framework in the Alberta oil sands region of Alberta, Canada. And that was really when a lot of the controversy really around oil sands was really coming to the fore. Our team needed somebody who could manage 47 stakeholders. They called stakeholders, but people with various interests, all the way from First Nations, Métis, NGOs, municipalities, provincial, federal government, big hydrocarbon corporations, forestry companies, you name it. And I assembled a team of crackerjack scientists that were going to work on this, but we needed somebody to keep us moving. We needed somebody who could help us through all of the difficult conversations that we were going to have. It was going to be a 2.5-year process of growth. And somewhere, I didn't feel like we had the capacity to make sure that not only we had those conversations, that they were fair, but also that we got something done, that we made decisions. And lo and behold, one day, Kathy Porter walked into our office, and she had just moved to this area in Secwepemcúl'ecw. She had purchased some property, was going to build her own house, and she was looking to connect with some of the locals. And it was just a gift. It was a gift from the Creator. Because Kathy had the skills to get us through the grown zone over and over and over again. And in the end, Kathy, we produced a management framework with 68 recommendations that went to government, ultimately led to the establishment of a new act. So that's how I got to know Kathy. And I'm just really excited today to be able to share her with you. So Kathy, that's how I got to know you. What else do you want to share with everybody about yourself?
Well, thanks, Barry. It really is such a pleasure to be here, and it brings back memories. When you played that music, I can remember working with some elders up in the traditional Cree and Chippewan peoples. Could they shake a rug? My goodness.
That's for sure. And the
anyway,
Métis jig.
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I was really outclassed, let me tell you. Anyway, just to start with, I was born on the lands of the Ohlone people, known as Oakland, California, in colonizer terms. I grew up hearing stories from my great-grandfather about his relationship with the Yavapai Apache in what is now known as New Mexico and Arizona. I live on the Secwepemc lands near where you are, Barry, in what's commonly called Falkland, BC, in the current dominant culture vernacular. And at the moment, I'm in the Sechelt First Nation on the west coast of BC in Sechelt. We certainly had some interesting times. I think my biggest takeaway from that time, as I reflect on the conversation we're about to have today, is that we can't go back and undo the harm that has been done. We can, however, go forward and create new futures. And I think we need to recognize that the work is going to be difficult. People are going to be upset. The work you and I are doing to right long-standing transgressions will be arduous. We will need to be compassionate both with ourselves and others, and we'll have to listen to the harms, perhaps over and over again. Indigenous peoples around the world have much to offer, and dominator cultures like the settler colonial world in which you and I live have much to learn. However, we have to learn for ourselves. Levinson talks about the paradox of natality. We suddenly realize we missed all this education growing up, so we turn to Indigenous peoples and say, teach me. That's not the way it's going to work. We have to educate ourselves. We have to learn about the culture that we inhabit. And that's one of the things that I want to look at today as we get further into this. As I said about the dancing, it was a real privilege to work with those many elders, to learn what they had to offer in terms of their traditional ecological knowledge that we could draw into this ecosystem management framework that they were working on. I must say my distress at the end of that was one paragraph in Slavey. Yes, we listened to those voices, but at the end of the day, it was the industry voice that spoke loud. It
Right.
was the colonizer government that spoke the loudest at the end of the day. Did they adopt some of our recommendations? Yes. Did it change the fact that they were going to continue to extract fossil fuels out of the ground? No. Did it give back land to the indigenous peoples who had lived there since, in their words, time immemorial? No. So, these are just some of the reflections going forward. Climate change, an area that I'm deeply involved with now, was not a casual chat. It was the reality that they were living as a result of our extensive use of fossil fuels and the climate injustice that continues. After Fort Mac, I went off and worked for an engineering company for 5 years. That was another education. I was the one mediator, facilitator in a company of 900 engineers. The interesting thing for me was I learned another way of thinking, another way of seeing the world, which was most informative. They were solving complex problems. And again, one of the things that struck me there was so often the way the problems were defined with a solution in mind. There wasn't the idea that how do we solve this together. The focus was on how to build this new dam to move the water in a different way, or how to put in a new transit plan on land that was stolen, to put it bluntly. We didn't ever ask why. Why are we doing this? And so, with those sort of thoughts in the back of my mind, I went off and undertook to do a Master of Design in Strategic Foresight and Innovation at the Ontario College of Art and Design. My partner kind of planted the seed. Oh, maybe you should go look at that. Anyway, I applied without any expectation of being accepted, and 2.5 years later, I finally submitted my major research paper. People always ask, what is this strategic foresight thing? And I think in my cohort of 24 people, we struggled with that throughout the program as well. What is this about? Basically what it is about is this idea of, that we take from design thinking, this idea of bringing empathy into the work that we do. So often we operate just from here up. We don't have that whole embodied experience. We don't open our heart when we're sitting in a meeting among scientists or engineers.
Yeah.
We don't draw in the creative. We don't bring in the arts, the poetry, the music, like you're doing in this program. And of course, we need to analyze and look at different solutions. But it was that collaborative process with a group of very experienced and thinkers, influencers who wanted to be change makers. We did these things called gigamaps, and we did, systems thinking stuff, and we did futures, and really we had a blast. Throughout that, I reflected on the work we had done in Fort Mac, building these computer-generated scenarios. Those big, huge maps that we hung up on the wall where everybody said, my house isn't there. But to demonstrate what the future could look like, what futures could look like over time. And so, in strategic foresight, we do similar kinds of work, but it's less from a computer-generated perspective and more from a human experience-generated perspective. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit later. But it is about that. How do we go about gathering information, mapping that information so that we can see the system, the big picture, so that we can, as Donella Meadows would say, find the leverage points where those opportunities for change exist. And so I'm just delighted to be here to speak with you today and to pick up the thread of our previous work and perhaps see with new eyes.
Yeah, wow. I took a few notes there just on activities that I've been working on that relate to specifically to what you're saying is that I just continue to learn, and I think that that's going to be key for everybody, is continuing to learn and share, because that's where the connection of things actually really happens with impact. You talked about the why and the emotion. And, like I've been looking at, there's a lot of legislation out there right now looking at trying to perhaps turn in the right direction. Like there's the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People. There's the Declaration Act that's been put in place in British Columbia, first ever. There's a new Impact Assessment Act in Canada, and then the follow-up of Bill C-15, which is looking at how do you make sure that that act and all the other colonial legislation reflects the real intent of UNDRIP. And yet at the same time, it's being pointed out that under all of these existing laws, there's still a minister who has final say. And it's still a higher and lower level of power. And until we get even on co-governance, on government to government, or perhaps government to government to government, until that's level, you can't expect to be making the right choices every time, because you're not going to have consent of all parties. And the thing that came out in some work that actually Sonny Laborde was talking about this with respect to this Secwepemc review process that I was involved in on the cumulative effects side, that they had to be very careful about trauma inducing language by continuing on with this insensitive way of looking at the situation. So even in that context of understanding that, we're going to talk a little bit more about that in the Forest of Whispering Speakers for sure. But this is I think where a lot of the growth needs to happen. It's not, like you say, it's not on the engineering side. It's not on the counting the bears and the bunnies. We're good at that. What we're not so great at is connecting as humans in these important decisions and land use plans and marine use plans that we're working on. And I think, this is where, as I was saying in my opening remarks, this lock is at least in part because of a disconnect between cultures. And we need to bridge that. And the first way to start bridging that is to understand the implications of, as you called them, the harms that have happened. So let's open the box here. We're not going to get through it all today, but let's start talking about the cumulative effects of colonization.
Mm-hmm. Yes, it's an interesting question, and one that's been dominant for me for quite some time. I've worked with many Indigenous peoples in my career, as have you, and it became apparent to me, like to you, that I'd been told many lies. The education I received was intended to keep me from knowing the real history of Canada, the real history of the United States. COVID-19 and movements such as Black Lives and Indigenous Lives Matter have exposed ever more clearly the deep divisiveness in communities and the world here in Canada. And so
that's for sure.
I think for me, the first part is to understand how is it that what is it that the dominant culture does? And to an extent, all cultures do this. We train our children in a particular set of values and a particular way of thinking, and so that's one of the things that I look at in my research. Social activism is one way to recognize the cumulative effects of colonization. What is the cause of these inequities? And so it became clear to me as a white ally, I would have to understand how the dominant culture stays in power. What is it that they do at the very core level, right? I understand about the legal system, the political system, the history, but what is it right down at the personal level that's going on? And how to use a cliche, how is it that we can, or that people who have been marginalized uh, speak truth to power? And so I began to explore the cumulative effects of colonization from that perspective. And as you know, I'm a mediator by profession. I've been a mediator for over 20 years, and mediators have been around for thousands of years. In some ways, it's an ancient profession that I feel privileged to be a part of. Um, it's this ability to draw out understanding among parties with different experiences and views. And, my role is to maintain that sense of equanimity while, helping people to see the contrast between their different situations, the pull that we engage in.
Can I share? I'll share something.
I just want to tell a story from Leah Betta Simoke Simpson.
Yeah.
She talked about mediation in her book, As We Have Always Done. She talks about bringing in mediators to bring together the Anishinaabe and the Hoof clan, because they had become disconnected. They'd gone in different ways, and the Hoof clan had gone away, not willing to lay down their lives to feed the Anishinaabe anymore. And so the mediators came to help create that understanding, and as a result, they were able to work together again. So it's that part of the practice. So go ahead.
Well, and so I was fortunate enough to be in a webinar yesterday. Actually, was talking about dispute resolution of all things, and it was opened by Elder Larry Grant from the Secwepemc Nation on the Salish Sea in British Columbia, and he was talking about a number. He's very insightful, but he said, there's always disagreement. There's always been disagreement, and he said it's a lot like a good marriage. There's a few arguments, maybe some yelling, but there's also understanding and compromise. And mediators help us maybe take down the temperature a bit sometimes and have the right conversation.
Yeah. So the other thing is that, within the last century, it's important to understand that the profession of mediation has been adopted by the legal profession as a way to, in the 1930s in the U.S., as a way to address the overcrowded, judicial system. And I won't go into, my experiences in Alabama and everything that was going on down there. But there's an uncomfortable truth in the legal system that Art Manuel talks about in his book, Unsettling Canada. Questions whether a legal system designed to uphold and serve one worldview can come to any conclusion other than the one that supports the culture out of which the system emerges. I think that's really important to understand, that there are, and the AFN produced a report again to express their concerns about the doctrine of discovery and these discriminatory practices. We have to keep in mind that the role of the Canadian legal system is to protect the interests of those who stole the land, to be quite blunt. And so, mediation is going to be an interesting process in that we have to move away from the thinking of moving towards equality, and we have to look at what it will take to create equity. And as you talk about, the prosperity and that, what you want to create in terms of prosperity, there is a lot of work to do.
A lot of work to do. And it's not like there weren't laws. There are deep embedded systems of laws and practices and governance that were on this land, and they've just been, I guess, conveniently ignored, or and it's exactly what you say. So a lot of times we see in cumulative effects work through reviews and legislative processes, this idea that you need to push these two thinkings together and merge them, but they're really not. They're parallel, and the power, as you were saying, two-eyed seeing, is being able to use both, right? It's not one validates the other. It's that there is distinct capability and knowledge in each, and together we could be much more powerful.
Yeah, I think Grand Chief Philip Stewart really brings that message forward that um, if we're going to survive on this little green and blue planet on which we live, we're going to have to work together.
Yeah.
And from my perspective, it means really taking responsibility for being a member of a white supremacist culture. And a
Right.
lot of people feel very uncomfortable because they think, well, I'm not a member of the Ku Klux Klan. And, the famous words of somebody south of the border, I'm not a racist. Well,
Yeah.
sorry, darling, but I'm calling question on that.
So, there's no way, like, this is going to be a very long conversation. There's no way we can cover all the bases, and we're leaving out a million things. But, given your research, recognizing that there are these inequities, and I believe that they are part of the things that are locking us down and making us miss opportunities. Unlocking that, what are some of the ways that we could begin to try to reconcile the cumulative effects of colonization?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I think in the strategic foresight, and I want to return to that if we have time today. But
Okay.
but as I said earlier, I wanted to look at what is it that's going on that keeps us in place, so we can look at some of the phrases, and we can begin to question that language. The common phrase at the bottom of the totem pole.
Oh yeah.
Well, wait a minute, just a second. or the use of the word masterclass. Big thing that's going on, the
Yeah.
masterclass. If you are the son or daughter of slaves, that term does not endear you to the person who's leading the class in any way, shape, or form. So we have to look at the language. So I looked at Chela Sandoval's work in her book Methodology of the Oppressed, and she describes seven different techniques that dominant cultures use to maintain their dominance. And and the one that struck me, in some ways, it's what we've just been talking about: the privation of history, that the sense that there was no governance here. These were equivalent to who knows what. We're going to come in with our brilliance and expertise, and we're going to teach you and show you. And in our teaching and showing, we're going to destroy your history. We're going to
Right.
commit genocide because we want the land for our own profit. But and when I think about what I learned about Indigenous peoples in elementary school, it was as though they did not exist any longer. They were not on the earth anymore. This was ancient history. It was not current history. That's the privation of history in action. She
Yeah.
talks also about, the other thing that it does is it preserves this sense of whiteness, and it denies the lived history of those people who were here for centuries before Europeans came along.
Which is part of why we needed to go through the truth and reconciliation process to bring some of this, to start to bring some of this back.
Well, let's be clear, though, that the Truth and Reconciliation Commission identified 95 something things, and
Yes.
the Yellowhead Institute out of Ryerson University in Toronto has been tracking these for many years. Yeah. And there were 5, sometimes 8, now 3 out of 95.
I know.
Excuse me, this is
Yeah.
outrageous. This
Right.
is outrageous. And so, but if I go out into my community in Falkland, let's say, with that attitude, I will get dissed to a level that is, unconscionable in some ways. So we have to find other ways to educate people, to teach people about how their behavior impacts others. A couple of other ones she used. She talks about identification, this ultimate idea that, well, we're all in the skin, and what color, what difference does our skin color make? Well, what that does is say that, if you're not white, it's not okay. We're going to assimilate you until you're all white.
Right.
Um, um,
No, there's a lot of strength in diversity.
yes, but, how we go about achieving that diversity and wanting to have that diversity exist, is critical if we're going to move forward at all with reconciliation. I think the key thing for me about reconciliation is that it cannot and will not occur until we're reconciling between two equals.
I agree. Yeah, well, that's a foundational piece there. And I mean, so, I guess what you're saying there, we're going to move on to the Forest of Whispering Speakers coming up here, but probably the biggest driver or the best lever we have initially is education and understanding, which is sort of where I was starting with awareness. It's like when you don't even know, you're not aware, it's really hard to try to reconcile when you don't even know that it's there. And so, the more we can have conversation, I think the better, right? Because and the more we can share, and the more we can work with people like you who help us get through those difficult conversations in a fair way.
Yeah. I just want to speak quickly before we go to the Whispering Forest there that, Leanne Simpson talks about when she claims her Anishinaabeg way of knowing and stands outside this struggle of opposition. The language that Sandoval uses is counter ideologies, and she gives examples of how people need to peruse for signs of power to counteract that, to create a new image, or even to use silence as a form of resistance. We see that in social movements, the artists, the activism, the artivism that's in the streets. But she says, through her writing, she calls for a radical resurgence and invites others to listen to her explanation that it's an extensive, rigorous, and profound reorganizing of things. Her call is to Indigenous peoples to be grounded in normativity, which she describes as collective, reciprocal self-recognition. It's what you talked about, Barry, about looking in the mirror, the act of making it a practice to see another's light and to reflect that light back to them. Mm-hmm. So that's the approach from one of these leading Indigenous scholars and thinkers to reject the deprivation of history and instead focusing on centering within Indigenous nationhood. So I just needed to sneak that in there.
Yeah, it's highly crucial nuance that needs to be there, and it's not all one side needs to do something or the other side. It's responsibility on both sides for sure. And I think that we're going to see, this show is often focused on cumulative effects and implementing choices in land use and how we shape our world into the future. We've allowed ourselves to be framed by just a small set of laws that don't recognize all of the connections. And I think that's where it's going to... This shift is going to come where, as you're saying, Indigenous people will share the governance and law structures that have been here for thousands and thousands of years that work very, very well and are in tune with the land. And all of us need to be listening and working to implement. I think that's really important. That's one of the unlocks. It's one of the keys. Yeah. All right. Well, as with many situations, I feel like show number 2, 3, 4 is probably coming. But anyways, let's move on to this next piece here, which is so highly apropos for this conversation that we're having, which is the Forest of Whispering Speakers. So, Forest of Whispering Speakers, as I've been saying, is a line out of a song by the Tragically Hip, For Good Life, You Just Might Have to Weaken. written by the one of the greatest poets in the world, Gord Downie, who has passed. And he's one of my idols and mentors, and I try to honor him and his art and the messages that he left us through this show and through this segment. And I've gone through my interpretation of a few songs in past shows, but today I'm going to do things a little bit differently. As many will know, Gord had died of cancer in 2016 or 2018. And but he made a significant contribution through all of the music that the Tragically Hip brought to Canadians in the world. But he also worked on a few individual projects that were deep and close to him. And so I'm going to share this here today, and I'm going to use Gord's words rather than mine. And I'm going to invite people to take a look at this and learn, interpret, soak with it for yourself. But go to secretpath.ca, and it's one of the legacies that Gord left for us, which was the story of Chani Wenjack. So I'm going to read these words here rather than make my interpretation. I think it's really well articulated here. So Gord wrote that Mike Downey introduced me to Chani Wenjack. He gave me the story from Ian Adams Maclean's magazine story dating back to February 6, 1967. The lonely death of Charlie Wenjack. Chani was a young boy who died on October 22nd, 1966. That was just after I was born. Walking the railroad tracks, trying to escape from the Cecilia Jeffrey Indian Residential School to walk home. Chani's home was 400 miles away. He didn't know that. He didn't know where it was, nor did he know how to find it. But like so many kids, more than anyone will be able to imagine, he tried. I never knew Chani, the child his teachers misnamed Charlie, but I will always love him. Chani haunts me. His story is Canada's story. This is about Canada. We are not the country we thought we were. History will be rewritten. We are all accountable, but this begins in the late 1800s and goes to 1996. White Canada knew, on somebody's purpose, nothing about this. As you said, Kathy. We weren't taught it. It was hardly ever mentioned. All of those governments. And
on it. I didn't get that. Could you try again?
Siri was interrupting me, of all things. All of those governments and all of those churches, for all of those years, misused themselves. Many hurt children. They broke up many families. They erased entire communities. It will take 7 generations to fix this. 7. 7 is not arbitrary. This is far from over. Things up north have never been harder. Well, he was right, but I'd say it's all across Canada. Canada is not Canada. We are not the country we think we are. I am trying in this small way to help spread what Senator Marie Sinclair said. This is not an Aboriginal problem. This is a Canadian problem. Because at the same time that Aboriginal people were being demeaned in the schools and the culture and language were being taken away from them, and they were being told that they were inferior, that they were pagans, that they were heathens and savages, and that they were unworthy of being respected, that very same message was being given to the non-Aboriginal children in the public schools as well. They need to know that history includes them. And Gord finishes by saying, I have always wondered why, even as a kid, I never thought of Canada as a country. It's not a popular thought. You keep it to yourself. I never wrote of it as so. The next 100 years are going to be painful. As we come to know Chani Wenjack and thousands like him. As we find out about ourselves, about all of us. But only when we do can we truly call ourselves Canada. Go to secretpath.ca, watch the movie, and connect.
Thanks, Barry. Thanks, Gord.
Thank you, Gord. So much wisdom in that man and in the band that connected so closely and continues to every day is the top of my playlist. So anyways, heady stuff. Now it's time to have some fun and put Kathy on the hot seat.
Uh-oh.
So here we go. Kathy's rapid fire questions. Tremble in fear. No, I'm just kidding. One answer, well, one word or just a quick answer, if you can.
Okay.
We're just going to whip through this, and I know you're going to love it. I had the benefit of putting this list together knowing Kathy for a long time, so I tried to tweak a few of the things that I know are of interest to her. Yeah. So here we go. Kathy, you ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
Okay. Favorite color?
Green.
Oh, that's 2 in a row. Cardio or weights?
Cardio.
Pen or pencil?
Pen.
We live in a watershed where they grow. Oh, yeah. We live in a watershed where they grow the grapes for many fine wines. Merlot, Cabernet Sauvignon, or Pinot Grigio?
Cab Sauv. Or Shiraz, actually, but that's okay.
I'm with you. I'm going with the cab. One of your influencers?
My current partner, Jackie.
And what about, is there one thing you can bring to the forefront there?
She has a brilliant mind, has introduced me to many new ways of seeing the world, thinking about current problems, a deeper understanding of feminism, a socialist and determined mindset to do what she can to change the world, and continues to inspire me. She's my muse.
Wow, that's awesome. I really caught you off guard there, so good job. Kathy, this is an easy one. Dialogue or conversation?
Oh, dialogue.
In sailboats,
Yeah.
white hull or dark hull?
Oh, white. I love to see the blending with the white caps as we zip across the...
Best concert you ever attended?
Oh, Sinead O'Connor.
Whereabouts?
In Vancouver.
Vancouver. Your most used emoji?
The kissing face, smiley face.
I never use that. I should start that. I don't know. Yeah, that could be a lot of fun. I should try that. Last question. Something that's still on your bucket list.
Oh my goodness. Wow. I got, I sort of have given up on the idea of a bucket list, but there are things that I am going to do. I mean, I've already bucketed a lot of things like building a house and buying a sailboat and getting a master's degree.
Yeah.
Jackie and I intend to do some traveling once COVID is on. I guess my current bucket list is to get a COVID vaccination.
Yeah.
When my opportunity comes up, which it looks like it might be September or October or something like that. I just try to live one day at a time and enjoy being here.
Nice. I'm looking forward to being a deckhand on your sailboat, just saying.
Ready about.
Okay. So let's move into the last piece here. There's a lot. I mean, I've dedicated almost all of my career to being able to use different tools, different methods, different approaches to be able to help us imagine a future that we want, reverse engineer the steps to get there and create plans that we can then execute to get us on the right track. There's a lot of ways, and I have some favorites, but let's talk about, you've been studying many of these intensely, and then you've applied many for a long time in your professional work. So what kind of foresight techniques offer us high value when we're thinking about examining cumulative effects?
Yeah, it's a good question. I spent the day wrestling with it yesterday, in fact. So the one that I picked to talk about, and in particular because it attracted me because it has an emphasis on the arts and myth and other ways of thinking, sort of an embodied approach to thinking. So it's called causal layered analysis. It was developed by a brilliant futures thinker in Atala, and it's one of many, many foresight tools. And it's a way to begin to challenge our current worldviews, and we need to map out these complex systems so we can begin to see where the opportunities for change lies, as Donella Meadows would say, those leverage points.
Synergies.
Yeah, so the implications of not just one preferred future, but the possible, probable, plausible futures that lie ahead. So causal layered analysis is one technique that it sort of layers the structural and the technical between the creative litany and the metaphor to sort of activate the visual and to explore movement. These ways of seeing and experiencing the world beyond the logic of just words and the cognitive, and into an embodied experience to encourage the integration of our thinking, of the way we understand things in our body, not just in our minds. So it's a way
why.
to sort of
that's that intrinsic why.
Yeah. So I'm just going to go through the 4 layers because I know we don't have time, but it's a way to sort of create transformative spaces. And so
we
the
have
first layer
time.
is
We
litany?
have time because we make the rules.
Oh, okay, good. Okay. So I'll try to slow down a little bit. So in creating these transformative spaces for alternative futures, the 4 layers of the causal layered analysis are litany, social causes, worldview, and myth or metaphor. And the top layer, litany, describes the common or superficial expression of the problem, often for political purposes. Reconciliation is a perfect example. It sort of stands out there as though it's the mantra of the federal government, but it isn't really, because nothing's happening. But we just let that hang out there at the litany level. And then the next layer, social causes. It's really the layer where we describe the systems that keep the structures that keep the issue problematic. So here we find things like the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, the missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. We see it in, as I was talking earlier, in the legal system, in our education systems where we are denied truths. We see it in our healthcare system. Who gets the vaccine? Who gets the care? Who gets the PPE? These are all at that layer of social causes. The next layer is that sort of layer of worldview that gives legitimacy. So in some ways, this is about what I was talking about with Sandoval's language, that privation of history. This is the language that keeps you and I from knowing the truths that other peoples are living, the lives that other people are experiencing. So we need to begin to unpack those and explore those.
Right.
And then the 4th layer is the layer of myth. This is the metaphoric expression, the creative expression of the issue. This is the gut level where questioning occurs and begins to emerge. This layer takes us into the emotional, the poetry, the embodied ways of knowing that we listen to in the story of Cheney and Gord Downing's rendition of it. Words like settler, colonizer, white supremacist begin to emerge and challenge our ways of thinking as we work our way through these problems and begin to move out of the problem solution kind of thinking, one problem, one fix,
Right.
into the complexity of the problem and the potential for multiple solutions to an issue. There is never just one solution.
Right.
You know, there are multiple solutions, and we need to open ourselves to those layers.
Yeah, because these systems they're not rigid. They flex and they respond.
Flex,
They're
they
alive.
flow. We could have a whole conversation about Buzz Holling and his panarchy.
Absolutely, yes. And it's the whole energy of the universe, really.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So for me, the poetry, the power of story, and this is where I recognize the power of arts. And I've drawn, arts practice into my mediation. I looked at it in my research with other, very experienced and knowledgeable mediators around the world, and some of the stories that they shared are in my paper,
Nice.
and it's in the Creative Commons. You can share the link; it's out there.
Coming up, it's coming up.
So I've played collaborative games. I think I remember us one time up in Fort Mac. I gave everybody a colored hat to wear. I've played knots with senior scientists.
You used to entice us with chocolate bars too, I remember.
Yeah, I love bribery. It's but let's remember, these ways that and I think this is one of the things that I've learned from my work with Indigenous people is that there's a sense of humor.
Yes.
I remember a story that Jumbo Fraser
Yeah.
shared, about this guy who came and he brought a chocolate bar and he gave it to this young boy, this amazing gift. And the kid looks at it, takes a bite of it. It's like, no, you have to take the paper off. It's like, take the paper off? Okay, so you take the paper off. But then what do you do with the paper? Where's the place for this paper in this world that I'm living in? This is a story that really stuck with me. So let's continue to play. Let's carry forward our compassion and our open hearts and see where we go from here. And we continue to draw on. I continue to draw on what I call integrative thinking. It's this ability to balance not just two opposing models, but many different models, many different ideas to create and generate a creative solution that contains elements of all those models, and within that a recognition that to go back to a comment that you made that kind of struck me. We have, as white settlers, we have much more work to do than our Indigenous counterparts in this world. It's about equity. It's not about equality. And for me, my work is focused on the work that I have to do, and I make myself available, of course, to work with other people. And I've just recently worked with the Okanagan Nation Alliance and brought some of the foresight techniques to them. We had a lot of fun, created a lot of maps on the walls, and so ready to continue the work.
So we can't cover really in any way the content of your work, but we can share it. So let's just go to the CFX library for a moment here before we adjourn. But you have a paper, you're sharing your paper. I'm going to bring it up here on the screen, plus where people could download it. And it's kind of hidden there behind. See if I can handle my tech. Oh, look at that. I am moving into the new century.
There you go. Brilliant.
Anybody who's been following the show from the beginning knows the journey that I've been on. So actually that was quite amazing. But let's talk about your paper.
Well, I've been talking about it a little bit, I think,
right.
over the course of this. It's called Splitting Rock at Laughing Falls, Drawing Creative Consciousness into Social Justice Mediation. And so I look at, as I said, Shayla Sandoval's work around feminism and multiple feminisms, the differential consciousness that we need to think about the way we use language, the way language has been used to form us, and how we need to move outside of those framings to engage in other worldviews. I look at Indigenous thinking, the works of Leanne Bedesamoki Simpson and Art Manuel, his book, The Reconciliation Manifesto, and others. And then I look at the creative arts in mediation practice as a way to move beyond the cognitive and into those embodied experiences that we can get from poetry, that we can get from performance theater, that we can get from drawing. I had a mediation in the summer, and it was interesting. At one point, we were kind of at a place where both parties wanted to leave. And so I said, well, before you do that, the theme that we talked about yesterday was, whatever it was, rainbows, let's say. And I gave them each a piece of paper and a package of crayons. And I said, draw, about this theme on this paper. Just draw silently. Don't talk, don't engage. And so they both sort of picked up the crayons and kind of laughed and started to draw little stick drawings and everything. And I said, just a reminder, it's not about art. Everybody can draw. Just pick up a crayon and see what happens. Right. And so they started to draw. And then the funny thing happened. They started to talk about their drawings. They started to talk to each other without realizing that they were talking. They started to talk about their drawings to each other. They started to talk about the theme that had brought them into the mediation. And as a result of that, they began to open their hearts again to each other. And we were able to use the drawings and the work that they'd done around that particular theme to come up with an agreement that they both agreed to live with going forward. So it's just it's the excitement, the drawings from my granddaughter, for example, who reminds me of rainbows. I don't know where the camera is, but anyway.
Yeah.
This artistic expression that we, from an early age, you can't draw. You're not an artist,
Right.
Or you can't sail, you can't ski, you can't, we have all these judgments that layer on us, and yet here we are, these beautiful beings, and so that's sort of the focus of the paper. It's part memoir. You've been around me long enough to know, Barry, that I have tons of stories about when I lived in X or when I did Y.
I just, this is live, so I can't edit this out. But I had to get this book. I wasn't, because what you're talking about, I understand that. And I think this is something actually that you're cueing into. But, like when I write stuff, I start with a picture. Yeah. And I'm a terrible artist, but I have learned that engaging that side of your brain, and this is the creative consciousness idea that you're in, and this is not to be looked over. The power of this and how it served us for thousands and thousands of years, and then I see where you're going, like the whole concept of the systems where the environment nourishes people and then people choose how that economy is going to be. That's part of that is the social justice. It's the implementation of our choices based on our emotions. And, man, oh man, you don't get into this when you're up to here in EIA legislation and that kind of thing. But that's why it's not working. Yeah. That's why it's not working. And we need to expand our minds. So I really encourage people to go to this link. I will also put a hot link in the YouTube show notes. Get Kathy's paper. Reach out to her. She's an amazing, amazing person. Really great friend of mine. But I have all the respect in the world for your work and your thinking, Kathy, and how you make all of us who are working on these difficult, complex issues feel listened to and feel like a good contributor. So that's one of your superpowers. If anybody ever asks you about it, that's one of them that I've experienced firsthand.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, and is there? I guess that paper, your contact details, will they be in there for people who want to reach you?
I don't think so.
Where should
So
people reach out to you? Maybe on LinkedIn or something?
on LinkedIn, I'm on LinkedIn. I usually respond if people request to connect. So yeah, LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Well, we're gonna bring this show to an end. Um, I think that with Kathy's help, we started a conversation. We haven't started the conversation. Others have started that long time ago, but perhaps this might be the most prophetic way that business as usual clearly isn't where we need to keep going. We need to find different ways, and those ways represent different ways of thinking, being open to other people's perspectives, because those are where the answers are. So I would really, if you're still watching the show, I know you loved it. Please make sure you hit subscribe so that that tells the algorithms that this is a good thing and it'll be shared to more people. If you hit subscribe, you'll get notified when we go live for sure, or if there's any new additions. So that way, you don't have to work so hard. That's what I love about subscribing, because I just let the computer do the work for me. And then share it. Share it to somebody else that you know is working on this, somebody who's trying to break through. Because not only will they benefit from watching the show, but maybe then they'll be inspired to connect with Kathy and learn, as I've had the privilege of doing. So thank you so much, Kathy.
Mutual. Thank you, Barry.
Yeah.
We'll talk soon.
Right on.